welcome one, welcome all. Mr. Leahy, we have some briefings.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. I'd like to start off the city manager's briefing with Aaron Sutton, our Director of Emergency Management, Office of Emergency Management, and Ms. Sutton will provide an update on the COVID-19 status and our some of our city departments open.
Do Dr. Lindsay first. You do Dr.
Oh.
Lindsay first. She's remote.
My apologies, I didn't realize Dr. Lindsay was going to be with us today. Excuse me. First up would be Dr. Demetria Lindsay, the Director of the Virginia Beach Department of Public Health. Dr. Lindsay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. Can you hear me? All right, thank you. I have a few slides to go over with you to give you an update on cases of COVID-19 and activity in the state. You will have some of these slides. I will not go over all of them that you may have in your packet, but just to give you a general overview. Next slide, please. Let's see. All right, so far as of 6/8/2020, we've had 790 cases. The mean age is 48, so we are seeing a younger trend in terms of the average age of cases so far. Also, 2/3 of the cases have been between the age of 20 and 60 years of age. Next slide, please. This is a breakdown of the racial distribution of cases that we've seen. As you can see, it is roughly 24% African American, 50% white, but also we have a fairly significant percentage of unknowns with multiple labs reporting, such as private laboratories. We are making every effort to go back and identify the racial breakdown of these cases of unknowns. So that is in progress. Also, I put next to that distribution of hospitalized cases, again, 58% white and 23% African American, 5% other races, 11% Asian. Next slide, please. And here, breakdown of hospitalizations, and 13% of cases have been hospitalized with 3% ICU cases and also 3% deaths. Next slide. And this, again, is a breakdown also of ethnicity, and 92% of cases are listed as non-Hispanic in comparison to 68% of the population. This is another slide that I'm reviewing it with caution at this point because in our community testing, we are seeing a fairly significant number of positives among the Hispanic population. So we're monitoring this closely and making every effort to go back retrospectively and look at this data. Next slide, please. Here's a breakdown of cases based on the date of reporting. And you'll notice about 2/3 along the slide, we've inserted where phase 1 of reopening began. And as you shift to the right, we do see several peaks of 30 and 32 cases reported on specific dates, which corresponds to within 2 weeks of the onset of phase 1. So that was an area of concern. As we look at our percentage of positives, which I'll show later, we're still seeing a fairly steady rate, not a dramatic increase. However, next slide. And here is the same information, but now sorted according to date of onset of illness, which smooths the curve out a bit more. Next slide, please. And these are our overlapping curves here. The beige one is a graph of cases based on the date of creation of the investigation overlapping with blue slide of the date of onset. And here again, you'll notice that our lag is not nearly as dramatic as it was earlier in the outbreak for COVID-19. It's a fairly short lag, only a few days. However, as we look at cases based on date of onset versus date of the actual reporting and investigation, you'll see it is a smoother curve. Next slide, please. And here's a depiction of the cumulative number of COVID cases over time, and also those that are currently active versus cases that for which isolation has ended, resolved cases, as well as deaths. And as with the latest slide, we're seeing only 322 active cases compared to 418 that have been resolved. Next slide, please. So far, there have been 17,190 testing encounters for PCR testing. I would emphasize this is testing encounters, as an individual may have more than one test performed. The positivity rate hovers around 2%. In some situations lately, it has been as high as 3%. But as you can see, following the yellow curve with a 7-day moving average, it has been fairly steady. So despite, as I showed earlier, those peaks in testing since the phase 1 of reopening, as we look at our positivity rate, it's remained fairly steady. Next slide, please. I thought this may be interesting. I talked about this a bit in a previous presentation as we were looking at modeling, and noted that we were also, as part of that modeling process, looking at activity in Virginia. And this is a depiction of that mobility based on Google mobility data from April 17th through May 29th. And as you can see, there's been a significant reduction in retail activity in comparison to baseline prior to the onset of the pandemic, or actually in January and February prior to us seeing a lot of cases here in Virginia. Grocery stores and pharmacies, as one would expect, did not decrease as dramatically, and we still are seeing activity there along baseline. Interestingly, parks and outdoor spaces have shown a significant increase as one area that people have had an opportunity for outlets, as well as a significant decrease in transit stations and workplaces. And as one would expect, we are seeing evidence that people actually were staying home, with a 17% increase in the residential setting compared to baseline. Excuse me. Next slide, please. And this is a depiction of some of the information we're getting out of the modeling from UVA. Again, what I want to show here is projections of cases based on whether or not we will or will not exceed hospital capacity, showing several different scenarios. So to the left, at top and bottom, you see the modeling or predictions prior to many of the interventions that we have put in motion, in terms of, if unmitigated, if no interventions were made, what we would expect in terms of our hospital capacity. The top dotted line, horizontal line, reflects 120% of hospital capacity, which would have been what we expect on average hospitals to be able to absorb if they were to be able to expand their capacity to meet demand. Um, and clearly, without mitigation, we're predicted to have dramatically exceeded hospital capacity. And then looking at strong and light rebound, as you can see for the Eastern region, with a strong rebound, which would have been a return for social interaction of the community to 1/3 of its baseline prior to the onset of our restrictions, we were predicted to have exceeded capacity by by July or August, or would be predicted to exceed capacity. With a light rebound in the Eastern region, models predict that the hospital capacity would not have been, would have exceeded 100%, but not exceeded the hospital's predicted capacity to expand beyond 100% capacity. Then looking at the bottom slides, we're again looking at strong and light rebound with also looking at the impact of better detection, which basically amounts to case investigations. So with case investigations, there's predicted significantly, again, much lower in predicted cases and not reaching hospital capacity at all in this scenario. The University of Virginia is also looking at the impact of contact investigation on top of this, and so we expect to see that in the near future. I might add, though, that again, caution is recommended because the unknown here is the human factor in terms of how much people will continue to interact, whether or not we will continue as a community to observe the public health preventive recommendations, such as social distancing, wearing a mask, staying home when one is ill or has symptoms suggested of infection. These are important factors that also would come into consideration. I believe there are a couple more slides. And just briefly, I wanted to note that we are actively involved in community level testing. One part of this is testing of long-term care facilities, and this activity is called point prevalence survey testing. We've recently completed testing of one long-term care facility with over 1,000 tests completed for residents and staff. And we've also working with community partners for targeting of specific communities in Virginia Beach as well. Also, point prevalence survey testing will be conducted for additional long-term care facilities by request of the facility. Point prevalence testing of all residents and staff will be a requirement for long-term care facilities to begin to open up and move from to phase 1 and phase 2 according to current recommendations. We continue to work very closely with long-term care facilities and assisting them in their preventive efforts, looking at their actual current practices, as well as assisting in fit testing and staffing. We also have a number of upcoming community testing events. This is continuing. Our focus continues to be on those who appear to be at highest risk or have limited access to testing. The most current ones will be focusing on the Hispanic and Filipino communities. We also will be offering a large-scale testing event at Green Run High School for the entire community. Next slide. And finally, I did want to mention that there's an app that is available to anyone in the community who would like to check their symptoms. You can go to this site at www.vdh.virginia.gov/coronavirus/COVID check, or go to the VDH website and look for this ad. This app is called COVID Check, and it allows you to check your symptoms, find out based on the symptoms that you have whether or not testing is recommended, and also locations for testing. And it will answer a number of frequently asked questions as well. That's all I have for today. I want to remind everyone that it's very important as we continue to open up these phases that you continue to practice the preventive measures such as social distancing and wearing masks, going out in public, particularly in situations where maintaining that 6-foot distance is not possible. The measures that we're taking, such as case investigation, contact tracing, and other measures, do not replace the important measures that each of us can take as individuals to prevent infection. For those individuals who may be involved in large group gatherings, such as demonstrations that are going on, this is particularly important, particularly the wearing a face mask, keeping that distance if possible, but it may not always be possible. So we strongly encourage you to practice those measures as much as possible and consider getting tested as well. We will continue to post sites that individuals can access for testing, and we'll continue to monitor availability. Thank you.
Dr. Lindsay. Okay, Dr. Lindsay, thank you once again for keeping us up to date, and your efforts are more than appreciated. Thank you. Okay.
All right, now this time, Aaron Sutton, Director of Office of Emergency
we go.
Management, is up.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Just a few quick updates for you. OEM will be transitioning the city to mostly a recovery operation with COVID over the next week or so. Our logistics team is going to stay on board for the near future as we plan how to best transition resource ordering back to the departments as the supply chain remains somewhat hampered. OEM met with the MLT yesterday to review the first batch of departmental reopening plans and prioritize openings based on where public-facing services are provided. Just a quick summary. To date, we've received 14 departmental reopening plans and are being reviewed. 4 departments and offices received approval to reopen to the public based on current federal state guidelines in place. Their openings will be staggered. A staggered approach and messaging will be forthcoming about the services made available. The 4 departments, aquariums, libraries, Commissioner of Revenue, and Treasurer's Office. Those are, as I stated, are staggered openings. That's not an all or nothing. OEM will be meeting with the MLT on a weekly basis to review reopening plans. And as specific guidance has not yet been released for Phase 3 and beyond, the reopening plan review process will be iterative, and we will continue continuous modifications to ensure we're in compliance with the latest guidelines. The city is working closely with Public Works, Building Maintenance to ensure modifications are made for the departments that will have public-facing operations, interactions with customers. Communications Office is developing a package of signage so that there is consistency across the city and related materials to facilitate reopening. They're working closely with department representatives to convey the right messaging. As certain services open at different times, messaging is going to be extremely important. So we'll be keeping the website up to date and coordinating all the releases as things open up. With that, I will, if there's any questions.
Any questions? Mrs. Henley?
I noticed you didn't mention any dates.
No.
We're getting a lot of questions about when various things are going to open. I'm particularly hearing about libraries and rec centers. Do you,
The rec centers have not had their plan approved yet, so it's not approved for reopening yet. Various programs from Parks and Recreation have been approved, like dog parks, skate parks, park shelters. All of that is provided on the website. The reopening plan approval process allows those departments to move forward. I can give you two dates, or I can give you a date for the Commissioner of Revenue and the Treasurer's Office will open on June 15th. Commissioner of Revenue's office will be by appointment only, and the Treasurer's Office is opening each location except for Lynn Haven, which is co-located with planning at this point. Libraries have started their automated materials handling. They started Monday because they have over 78,000 pieces of material out in the community, so they'll start taking that back. They will be moving into lobby only in the next couple weeks. All of this information will be put together to provide the exact dates. The reopening plans had to be approved first because we want to make sure that they have the PPE, the protection and barriers necessary. So that review process had to be approved first, and as they move to the next step of opening, all of that communications will be provided to you.
so it sounds as if each thing is going to really be a phased-in opening.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think, we kind of are hoping we just unlock all the doors and
No.
let everybody start coming. And we
No, ma'am.
That's not the way it's going to be, huh?
Yep, it will be a phased approach, a careful approach, which is extremely important. We know the business community is also looking at phased approaches, but a careful approach to these is extremely important for our community and for our employees.
Thank
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. And the phased approach is the proper way to go because we want to give assurances to the public that we are proceeding, even though we are opening safely.
Absolutely,
And, this is hopefully going to get us to phase 3 a lot quicker.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
Hey, Mr. Leahy.
So Mayor and members of council, next up, I'd like to ask Steve Cover, Deputy City Manager for Public Safety, to come up and give us a little bit of insight to the activities this weekend and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I'm going to be brief. I know you all have a busy agenda this afternoon. I'm just going to tee up Chief Sakaro, who's here with me this afternoon. Busy summer weekend, especially at the oceanfront this past weekend. Friday and Saturday evenings were very busy, as can be expected for our oceanfront during the summertime. Saturday, as everyone knows, we had a gathering and a march from Mount Trashmore to Town Center. I'm very thankful to not only our police department, but the promoters, as well as the citizens that marched in that peaceful protest, if you will. The police department met prior to the event with the organizer, laid out a very detailed operational plan, and I think between that and the peacefulness of the crowd, that worked out certainly in our favor. I'm very appreciative of the work both the promoter and the police department did, along with Public Works traffic engineering, to secure the northbound lanes of Independence Boulevard for that some 2-mile stretch from Edwin Drive all the way to Virginia Beach Boulevard, including the on and off ramp on the northbound side that goes on to 264, so people could safely get to their destination. There were several of the council members there. I know Council Members Abbott and Bellucci were there, and Councilman Rouse spoke along with Chief Sakaro at the event, so that's much appreciated as well. Heat did play a factor. As you all know, Saturday was a very hot day, especially for those of you that were out. We had a handful, if you will, of heat-related issues with people that attended the event. We had EMS and fire embedded with police on the periphery of the site, so EMS was able to quickly get in and render aid to those folks that needed it that day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Sakara, and I'll stand by for questions. Chief?
Thank you. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Cover. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So I just will add on to what Mr. Cover said. We had opportunity to identify the gathering. We met with the organizers Thursday, met with the male and the female that were identified as the lead. I brought my members of my leadership team. We met with them. It was a very productive conversation that enabled us to better prepare and manage the Saturday events, starting out Mount Trashmore and culminating at Town Center. There were estimates of approximately 2,000 persons that ended up at Town Center. I'd like to also recognize and share my sense of appreciation to council members Abbott, Bellucci, and Rouse for not only being in attendance, but being active participants, active listeners, and engaging the crowd. It was a very passionate crowd. There were a lot of voices in the crowd that we tried to communicate. And as we move forward, we're developing action plans in conjunction with the Media Communications Office on developing a community engagement plan that seeks input, but first steps back to listen to what's going on and then take some deliberative actions. I will say on behalf of the public safety team that were there, to include our partners from Public Works, Fire and Rescue, as well as the partner agencies that we called to assist. We had a lot of planning, a lot of cooperative effort, and I think that resulted in a good outcome. In addition, I'd like to compliment the commanding officer of the 3rd Precinct, which is where Town Center is, Captain Rio Hatfield. He initiated proactive communication and gave the merchants some suggestions on how to bolster their individual properties and be attentive. That was also followed up by a message from our community engagement unit, which I added to that message to include that there was a relationship with the organizer and it was a partnership seeking a peaceful outcome. So I think coupled with the advanced communication by the command and our community engagement unit, the cooperation from the organizers and the cooperation of the attendees, we had a successful outcome. We stayed there to the early evening as most of the crowd returned to Mount Trashmore. Several returned, and we had probably about 75 persons return to Town Center Plaza, but there was nothing of incident. Again, the crowd was very diverse, different ages, groups, races, and demographics, so we were generally pleased. As Mr. Cover said, the heat played a factor in it. We had several medical emergencies where persons fainted, but we had a medical plan that we were able to implement and deploy resources immediately. So as we move forward, we're continuing our conversations. We have some planned meetings with different community members that start as early as this afternoon and throughout the week. And we're here to continue our active engagement in our civic, our corporate, our faith-based community, as well as our academic community to move forward. We're in a listening mode, we're in a learning mood, and we welcome all ideas towards a collective better place for tomorrow. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions from the council.
Any questions? Mr. Tower.
Chief, could you give us a little bit of follow-up on the previous Sunday oceanfront activity, and is there anything more to report on that?
So We're building our investigative plans as far as follow-up. We built investigative teams to review the video that was brought up at last week's meeting. We've assigned members of the team to review the video that's out there. We're working with state and federal partners to follow up on the investigative leads, to include not only on the felony charges where persons have been arrested for looting and burglarizing, but we're looking at the video, the available video, to identify other looters and also other instigators. We have some pending action with our federal task force members, reviewing some of the things we saw and learned from Sunday night, so that's ongoing. I know a point of question last week was the Little Red Truck. We're following up on the Little Red Truck. We've spent a lot of man-hours investigating the Little Red Truck, to include tracking the timeline from a video perspective. We've already met with the Commonwealth Attorney one time on how best to proceed on criminal charges. We've also in conversation with the City Attorney's Office on how best to move forward the criminal charges from Sunday night's event.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Bellucci?
Thank you, Chief. I have two questions, and I don't think you can answer them today. But in the spirit of transparency and in the spirit of sharing as much information as we can with the public, who has a great interest in the conversations that are occurring, I'm receiving a lot of inquiries about a concept called 8 Can't Wait. And it's about a number of de-escalation techniques that will result in fewer uses of force and fewer fatal uses of force. I heard you say at the event on Saturday that Virginia Beach hasn't received credit for some of the policies that are currently in place. And I wonder if you would mind, and I think you may be working on this, but I think we need to do a really more complete job of sharing precisely what those specific responses are, to be more transparent with the public and to give people who live in Virginia Beach a greater sense of understanding about what the policies are and specifically how they relate to those 8, which are part of a national dialogue. So that's one.
So thank you, Mr. Bellucci, for lifting that question up, because it is very relevant, it's timely. That website just recently came to the city's attention. So as soon as that was brought to our attention, we reviewed that website and the 8 categories, and then we did an examination of our own policies and procedures, and we know that the website is not accurately reflecting all the things that we have in policy. We've made arrangements for the Media Communications Office to reach out to the website organizer to update that website with the accurate information. In addition, I've tasked staff to look at our existing department webpage, and how we can better tell our story. And better telling our story will be enhancing our webpage profile to include some of these things that you've mentioned. We can identify the 8 Can't Wait specific categories. We can highlight our CALEA accreditation, as well as our training, our de-escalation program, and our active bystanders. So that's actively ongoing, and it's in the process of being updated literally as I speak.
Thank you. And the second question is, I've received a substantial amount of feedback about a set of recommendations that were submitted to this body in 2016 by the Virginia Beach Interdenominational Ministers Conference. And it was a series of recommendations that were created by this conference. And, I just want to point out that I wasn't on council in 2016. I wasn't on in 2017, 18, and only for half of 2019. However, I did serve on the Human Rights Commission during that time, and I am aware of the existence of these recommendations. And so this, as you well know, and as members of our community well know, isn't a new conversation. And I wonder if you would also Have you been in touch with the ministers' conference in relation to their recommendations? Because I think that there's some frustration that there could be improved communication. And two, if you haven't, would it be possible to revisit those recommendations and to match policies and procedures or adaptations thereof with the recommendations from that 2016 report?
So that's a very thought-provoking, multi-pronged question, Mr. Bellucci, so let me try and answer, and if I miss anything, just catch me up and I'll try and answer that. To your first question, have I been in touch with the members of the IMC or the faith-based community? And the answer is yes. Actually, several of them have reached out to me directly, one seeking support, secondary seeking investigative support to things that they're reporting, and we're following up, and I've committed investigative response almost immediately, and I think our friends in the faith-based community will report back that they are pleased with the police department's response and reception. Specific to the 5-point plan that was lifted up several years ago as a result of the governor's listening session around the country, city staff has looked at that, reviewed that, and there are several recommendations that can be followed up on. We're continuing to look at that document, and I know as of late as Friday afternoon in the mayor's roundtable conversation, some of the members that lifted that proposal up were in the group, and we talked about that as a possible action item moving forward.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the work you and your colleagues are doing, and I think that there would be some urgency around the policies that can be adopted moving forward as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, and thanks, Chief, to you and your colleagues.
Okay, Mrs. Wilson and then Mrs. Henley.
I think on that 5-point plan, some of the things were put into place, but I can't remember which ones. Can you
So,
recall?
Mr. Cover may be better in a position to speak to that, but there were several items that are put in place, and there are several items that we're currently actively reviewing.
Yes, just real briefly, I don't have all the details committed to memory, but just over about half of the initiatives, the 23 initiatives in that 5-point plan, are either enacted or in process of being so. 3 of those initiatives have to do with a cadet program, and Chief Siqueiro just in the last couple of weeks has resurfaced a plan to re-examine the possibilities around a cadet program. So we'll be bringing that to the manager as time permits, and we can move forward.
Okay, Ms. Henley and then Ms. Abbott.
Well, I was going to offer to share this with anybody who wasn't here in 2016. It's quite a lot. It's very good. I've been rereading the 104-page constitutional report, some of the documentation that was put in here by at various times by the then police chief and the African American Council. I remember attending meetings for a year or more, a lot on Saturday mornings, talking with everyone, and I was going to ask for an update. I know a lot of this had to do with the body cameras, a lot of the things that have been implemented, and I just have recognized that every year when the chief makes his annual report, he has touched on these factors. So they have not been forgotten and put away. And I think that's the important thing that everybody remembers. I know that we tend to maybe not have things right on the front burner for a while, but I know that the use of force has been a great concern of the chief and the department all of this time. There's quite a good section in here on the constitutional issues related to the use of force for anyone who would like to read it. And I think our department has implemented a lot of these things. And I think that we need to take our time to go back and look and see what is being done. And I'm sure there are gaps and there are things that can be improved on. But we don't really have to reinvent the wheel. We've got a lot of it going, And I think it's very important that we look at the totality of all of this to see where we are and where we're going. I know we have our investigative review panel, which the city council appoints, and I believe in his last presentation to us, the chief said that there were maybe 2 or 3 requested, but then none of them were actually heard this past year. But we have so much of this in place. And I would really like for somebody to take the time to go back through this and let's see what is in place and where the gaps are. Because I really don't want people to think that we haven't done anything. It's all, a lot of it is here. And yes, there are other things that we can do, but let's pick up here and go forward. Let's don't spin our wheels starting at the beginning again. We can go forward, and I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, Ms. Abbott.
Thank you. Chief, first of all, I want to say thank you. I thought Saturday went very well. I'm appreciative of all the individuals that came and participated. I'd like to also acknowledge Councilman Rouse made some wonderful remarks at the end at Town Center, and I truly felt like it was a very well-executed event, and I'm grateful for not only all the demonstrators, but the police officers that participated. I want to echo kind of the same sentiments as Councilman Bellucci brought up. And there's at least 5 of us that did not have the benefit of that 2016 report, and I'm sure it came with a very robust presentation to council. If it would be possible for us to bring that back out and dedicate a workshop towards reviewing that so that all of us are up to speed. I know that report's been brought to my attention a number of times, and I would greatly appreciate getting the full scope of it and a copy as well. And I think that would be a great opportunity for maybe the 8 that can't wait to incorporate that into where we're at and just get a total picture. But I agree with your sentiments on trying to revamp what efforts we are doing well and making sure that communication is out there, because I spent a great deal of time on the police website and trying to figure out where we were at on some things. With the investigative review panel, I understand, I think we have 3 people up in August this year, and I'm curious to learn more about that as well. So more of just a general comment, but if it's possible to get a full brief and presentation of all that information, that would be great.
So absolutely, Ms. Abbott. In fact, as a result of Friday's conversation with the mayor's roundtable, that 5-point plan was brought up. We're looking at that, and I would be pleased to brief council not only on where the city and the police department is on that 5-point plan, but how your police department has gone above and beyond with our use of force reporting, our policy restraint on neck holes, our multi-layered investigative approach on administrative activities, our high emphasis on de-escalation, our understanding of the dangers of positional asphyxiation and some of the equipment that we've invested in to minimize that, our update on our body-worn cameras and how that's playing out, an update on our crisis intervention team training and the number of officers we have trained after 40 hours of crisis intervention training to recognize persons in crisis. I'd like to highlight our CALIA certified police department. We also have an early intervention system. We're able to alert and monitor officers that reach a certain threshold of activity. So, Mr. Mayor, I would be happy on behalf of the men and women of Virginia Beach Police Department to brief council on the 5-point plan, where we've been, where we're going, and what we're doing.
Yeah, we'll get that on the agenda. Ms. Booten.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments as it relates to working on and continuing the initiative and effort to focus on these, the 5-point plan and so forth. At the African American Roundtable, there was a request for a citizens review panel, and I've reached out to Attorney Stiles about putting together a proposal or resolution for something of that nature. There are some stipulations within that request, but I believe we can work through that to provide what the citizens are requesting. And I sent everyone an email about that particular review panel. So that's something that hopefully we can work through and maybe present together and support something like that, because that's what I'm aware of specifically as one thing that we can work on right away, along with those 5 initiatives. Also, I just wanted to say thank you to council members, because last week we talked about providing a statement as it relates to the events that took place regarding Mr. George Floyd and the unrest in our community. And we do have that statement that's been signed by several of the council members. So I just wanted to say thank you. And this is very important, and it will be going out collectively to let the public know as a body that we do not tolerate those types of murder, brutality, and so forth as it relates to black and brown people in our community. So I just thought that was important to share, that we are working and doing some things in a positive manner.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may just close on Ms. Wooten's note. I made arrangements to have a letter to the editor posted in Sunday's Virginia Pilot. I think the council's been made aware of that. So I felt that was important to lead out in front for the women and men of our police department and our community at whole. And finally, if the mayor and the council is interested, I've put a little some photographs together that we can speed through real quick if you're interested in seeing some of the photographs from Saturday morning's activity.
That would be great.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So, Mayor and members of council, the next up will be Brian Solis, Assistant to the City Manager for Special Projects. During the 2020 General Assembly, some legislation was enacted to increase regional taxes for the Hampton Roads Transit Organization. Some of those changes had a impact on the 6 cities that participate in HRT. I sent you a letter a couple of weeks ago describing the issue, and Brian is going to review for you what we hope will be the proposed solution, which would be on your agenda next week.
Thank you, Mr. Leahy, and thank you for all your time and effort on helping to develop a solution with the other city managers in the region on this issue. And Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you for having me this afternoon. Here to review, if we can get the slides up, there we go. What is really an exciting time from a transportation standpoint for our region, because for the first time, the region does have a regional funding source as opposed to relying solely on federal, state, and city resources, along with the fare box that riders pay. It's known as the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Program and Fund. I'm here to talk about one of the funding sources that was utilized to create this regional transit fund was the recordation tax of the cities and counties in the Commonwealth and in our region in particular. Let me back up just a little bit. Starting in 1999, HRT, which is actually the Transportation District Commission of Hampton Roads, is the formal name, was created by a merger of PenTran, Peninsula Transit, and what we knew here as TRT, Tidewater Regional Transit. And together they formed that commission, and the guiding document of that partnership is what's known as the Cost Allocation Agreement. And there have not been significant changes to that cost allocation agreement. It has served the region and each of the cities fairly well since then until what we're proposing now. Originally, that CAA was included 7 cities. A few years ago, Suffolk opted out of the agreement because they felt like they could provide their transit services within primarily their northernmost part of Suffolk. And so right now it's 6 cities of Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Hampton, and Newport News. Most recently, this 2020 General Assembly, again, the Hampton Roads Transit, Regional Transit Program was created. It's primarily to fund what we're calling high-frequency transit. So a network, and I'll touch on it here in a little bit, a network of 15-minute service that connects throughout the entire region to serve primarily a commuting purpose. The way the legislation reads is that the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, HRTAC, which, as you might recall, was formed in about 2014, I believe it was, to create a dedicated funding source for our Hampton Roads region for roadways, bridges, and tunnels. They are the recipient of these funds, and they are the beneficiary would be HRT to actually execute the program, and I'll talk about that. So Northern Virginia has had this program but utilizing the recordation tax for some time now, and it funds their regional transit service. Not the metro, but the regional bus service that transcends the cities and counties up there. What this means for our region, or the 6 cities, is basically a sum of roughly $5 million that equates to the recordation tax revenue on average the cities combined to equal a year. Our contribution is a good part of that. And it's actually $1.99 million per year on average. And that's because of the number and the value of the real estate transactions that Virginia Beach has versus other cities in the region. So we have consequently a good majority of that for those revenues. So what we're proposing, and again, I compliment a lot of the folks that had worked on this basically since the General Assembly ended, is to allow Hampton Roads Transit to keep what's known as the year-end true-up. So one of the interesting things about the regional transit service that Virginia Beach is part of through HRT is that you kind of start with 0 and end with 0 each year. So each city kind of purchases the type and amount of transit service, public transportation, it would like in its city each year, and at the end, they balance out the service hours used to provide that public transportation. Sometimes the city receives money, sometimes it pays a little bit of money, usually in the hundreds of thousands, really low hundreds of thousands. And over the years, it has averaged out to be a balance, about almost 0 when you average it out. So to speak a little bit about the region, what we're calling a regional backbone network, if you look at the table and you look at the 3 columns there, the goal is to really increase the frequency by which folks commute around our region. And this 15-minute service would be during peak morning commutes and peak evening commutes. And when we worked through the analysis and actually developing this plan over the past 18 months throughout the region and with our regional transportation organization, We found that we're doubling the amount of 15-minute service in terms of routes in our region. In terms of the population served, the transit shed, if you will, would basically almost triple in size. The number of jobs that would be accessed would more than double, and the walkability to these 15-minute routes of service would also be nearly tripled. What the fund would do, and it's an amendment to the Virginia Code, is to not only provide that operational service, the person hours of the operator or the driver, but it would fully fund the rolling stock, which are basically the buses. It would fund the maintenance of them and any support facilities needed to operate those routes in the region. What it looks like for Virginia Beach is the regional backbone are these routes here. The ones in orange are Route 1, and that should actually be Route 1, and 15 should be in green, actually. Those are in orange because they touch on Virginia Beach. They come into Virginia Beach, but are not, the majority of those routes are not within Virginia Beach, but rather touch on the north, western, and southwestern parts of the city. In the routes in green, Route 20 is the busiest route in HRT system at about 1 million riders per year. That's Virginia Beach Boulevard, briefly goes on Laskin Road in Virginia Beach, but stretches from Arctic Avenue at the oceanfront down Virginia Beach Boulevard, over to Laskin Road briefly, and then all the way down Virginia Beach Boulevard to the downtown Norfolk Transit Center. Route 36 would be a new and improved service in the heart of the city, in the Holland Road and Independence Boulevard corridor that connects on 15-minute intervals from Tidewater Community College transfer station there off of Princess Anne Road, up through the Holland Road corridor and Independence Boulevard through Town Center and to the Pembroke transfer off of Constitution Drive. So that's the kind of service that we would eventually see that would be funded by this new regional transit program. So what we're proposing is that we're able to authorize HRT to kind of hold the true up of the 6 cities to be able to hold harmless the cities from, in our case, what equates to roughly a $1.5 million kind of additional cost we would realize if we didn't give them this ability. The HRT Commission, of which Councilman Rouse is a member of, as well as Dr. Amelia Ross Hammond as the governor's appointee, approved the resolution language that you will consider next Tuesday. That will be on your agenda to consider. And all of this is in keeping with the state-required HRT's Transit Strategic Plan. Now, this is a multi-year document, over a longer horizon of roughly 10 to 20 years, but it's updated every 5 years, much like our comprehensive plan. One of the conditions that the General Assembly placed on creating this regional transit program is 2 things. Number one, the HRT could not use the CARES Act funding to hold the cities harmless. But on the benefit side, it required HRT to roll back the costs of our transit services basically to FY 19-20 costs. So that's how, and it caused HRT to make cuts within the organization. And so that's how we were able to receive the benefit of holding the city harmless from the recordation tax. With that, I know it's a good bit of information to give you in roughly 10 or 12 minutes, but I'm happy to stand by for any questions you might have.
Mr. Wood.
Thanks. So Brian, as currently enacted, the cost allocation agreement is based on services provided per city, correct? So, and this tax piece is actually going to be a flat amount that every city is going to pay the same percentage. It just depends upon what their volume of transactions is.
It's prorated. It's a, yes, sir.
But it's a transaction fee that if you record something in Virginia Beach or record the same thing in Portsmouth or whatever, you're still having that same percentage going to HRT or to this to the
Yes,
fund?
for the true up?
Right.
Yes,
Well, I
sir.
mean, just in general, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so, so what you're saying based on this, Virginia Beach is contributing the most of all localities?
Yes, sir, and we are. And through, though, the transit strategic plan, we will, and through our commissioners, work to ensure that we get our fair share of transit service as well.
Because, I mean, right now, we don't, and we also only contribute for what we pay for, so.
Correct.
You know, I think it's incumbent upon us that, you know, I don't have a problem with this. I know HRT's been looking for dedicated revenue source for years and years and years, and I'm glad they have that. But now that we're in this position where we're actually putting a big piece together, we need to do a lot of stuff. I mean, for example, the 20, you know, that as you said, that's the busiest one in the entire network. You know, we need to increase the frequency on that, and we need to demand that as being the big bill payer in the region. We need to make sure that the busiest route is more efficient. Otherwise, I mean, I still hear, and I know Councilman Rouse does too, when he goes to these meetings, you hear from people that say, you know, they wait for 2 hours, you know, to get to a place. If you drove, it would be 20 minutes. So I think it's important that, you know, as we have this bigger pile of money that we are putting in on behalf of our citizens, that we make sure that the routes in our city are improved, and then ultimately the routes in the other cities are going to improve as well. So I think that's really important that we do that. And then, I mean, also, you know, when they run, obviously not in a COVID situation, but the trolley is also, I think, one of the few moneymakers in HRT. So we want to make sure that we get a piece of it going towards that. But I think it's great, but I just think it's really important that we make sure that routes within our city get the attention, because we are paying the most in this area.
Okay. Mrs. Henley?
I need it simpler than he's got it. Could we have just like a sheet of paper that says, currently, this is how the funding is and what it is and where it goes, and this is what it's going to be? I'm kind of a little lost on the recordation tax and so forth, and how that comes in and where that comes from and what it's going to change for us. Just a simple, this is currently the way it is, and this is what it's going to be.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Mayor,
Can it be done simply?
Councilmember Henley, so are you speaking mostly of what the city pays HRT for the services, and what we currently do and what it will be?
Right. I want
Okay.
to know, you know, how much it's going to cost us and where the money's going to come from, if it's coming from different pots. You know, what our ultimate
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
input is. Thank
And
you.
yes, ma'am, will do. I just need to add real quick that this is a one-year solution. The region tried, and there was many city manager meetings on this to develop a longer-term solution. But staff will likely be coming to you, you know, later next year on hopefully a longer-term fix. So this will be in effect for FY '21. But we can provide that.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor and members of council, next I would like to ask Alice Kelly, Director of Finance, to come up and provide an update on the financials and how they're being impacted by COVID-19.
I'm going to take this off for a minute. Good afternoon, council, Mr. Mayor, and council members. Our city financial books closed for May this Friday, so we spent a couple of days trying to put together a report for you regarding the impacts that we're seeing. The first slide we have is the financial impacts of COVID. That we had a few things that we did because this is not just it's a health crisis that has caused obviously an economic impact. So real estate and personal property taxes that are due June 5th, council suspended the late payment penalty and interest to August 3rd. Our trustee taxes have delayed penalties. Our meal tax was suspended for 2 months as a tax holiday. And our public utilities suspended discontinuing water service due to non-payment. So that's on our revenue side. On our expenditure side, we did a hiring freeze. We eliminated non-essential purchases. We eliminated non-essential travel and training. And we implemented federal programs such as the public health leave. The next slide, you'll see the meals and hotel and admission tax due dates. The due dates haven't changed, but the date that penalties were assessed have changed. And then obviously in May and June, I just mentioned the meals tax was at 0%. And I mention this because it's caused a difference in how revenue is collected. And so that might have some impact on what we're looking at on our revenues. So the next slide is our projected fund revenues. So our revenues, we do have a few revenues that might exceed our budget this year. Our business licenses, we believe will be up $2 million over our budget. And our use of money, which is the money we get for interest and not, might be $2 million over. But our revenue expected to be under budget are our general sales tax, meal tax, hotel tax, and charges for services. And then we have two items that are our largest revenue sources that are real estate and personal property. And right now, it's a little bit too early to tell how they will be impacted. The next slide shows our glide path, and I wanted to take a minute on this glide path. The top lines are the expenditure and the bottom lines are the revenues. And so for the expenditure, we are at 89% of our budget in the month of May, versus typically the past couple of years, we've been at 93%. So for every 1% of expenditures, it's about $11 to $12 million of savings. So right now, compared to the previous 2 years, we're about $40 to $45 million of savings. If you look at our revenue, however, the yellow line is the past 2 years, and the blue line is what we are at current. And so the blue line is at 70%, where in the past 2 years, it's been at 78% of our budget. Now, the thing that we did is we closed the books on May 31st, but personal property taxes and real estate taxes weren't due until June 5th. So we were able to talk with the city treasurer and get the information of what revenues have come in the past few days. And so between the time we closed the books till yesterday, we received $132 million. So that 70 went up to almost 77. So we're pretty close to where we were in May 31st. And sometimes it's just timing of when that June 5th falls, if it falls on a Monday versus a Friday. So we have seen some slight variations in how much we get as of May 31st. The next slide is our general fund revenue in terms of buckets. And so as of May 31st, the big piece of the pie, the unrealized revenue, was $351 million, 29% of our revenues. However, if you add the $132 million that we received in the past few days, that 29% goes to about 21%. So that's on track. If you look at the next slide, what we did is we showed a history of real estate revenues, the general fund portion only, where we showed how much we received each year as of May 31st. And the $132 million will bump that up to closer to the 72% that we were talking about before. The next slide. Personal property taxes. Now, personal property taxes are probably the hardest one to predict because they typically don't come in any rhyme or fashion of when they're going to actually come in. So we received $58 million as of May 31st. Last year, we only received 57. The year before, we received 63 million. So we received about 53% of our budgeted, but typically personal property taxes come in a little bit later. So this is the one that we really need to really monitor the most. General sales tax. So general sales tax actually has a 2-month lag. And so the state receives it from the businesses 1 month and then takes another month to return it to the city. So we usually have a 2-month lag with that. And so we are at 85% in May compared to other years. So it looks good, but this May is really March's sales assessments. The business license tax, as I mentioned in the beginning, our business license tax revenue is a little bit better than we had been, and better than the budget. We're at 100% of our budget right now in May, and so we still have another month to go. And then our restaurant meal tax. the restaurant meal tax has allocations, the 5.5% allocation. Some of it's 3.5% is to the general fund, 1% to the tip, 0.5% to the TAP fund, and then a 0.44% to the open space. So this is in total. So we received $59 million, which is about 91%, 92% of our budget for real tax. And so we've posted about 11 months of data there. So it's about $4 million down from the same period in prior years. And then we've also suspended May and June's during the pandemic. So there will be a revenue loss in this, but we're not sure right now exactly how much that will be. Hotel room tax is probably the one that has seen the greatest reduction, where we were at 94% last year. We're at 81.3% of our budget this year. We also included a couple of slides to show, because we did change the timing of when taxes are going to be penalized, we wanted to show the assessments versus the collections. So what we did is we took what was assessed in March, and we put it where it should be collected in April to see if there's a big change. So to see if we hadn't collected the money or whether it's just not being assessed. And so as you see in March, February's sales were about 5 million, but the collection was almost down to 3 million. And that's due to the timing of people were given a grace period of when to pay their bills. So in April, our collection went up, but we're thinking that some of that is February and March's collection that we hadn't received. So it's a little bit challenging to predict this because the timing of it is not the way it usually is. And so that we have one for meals tax, and then the next slide is hotel tax. And this one's a little bit more challenging also because we're assessing and we get the assessments, but the collections haven't come in. And so it's hard to predict, will those collections come in? They will eventually come in, but when are they going to come in? And so we're challenged in looking at the assessments versus the collections. And then admission tax is another one that is the same trustee-type tax, where they've been collected, but they've been collected by the businesses, but the city hasn't received the collection yet. General fund expenditures through May, we have a salary savings of $24.7 million. In March, we were predicting about a $20 million salary savings, so the hiring freeze and other items that or other actions that we've been taking have really increased the salary savings and some of the other expenditure savings that we've seen have occurred. This happened in March, so really there was March, April, May, June. There was not that many months to do some significant savings, and I think the city's been able to do that. Another thing I wanted to show the council is our cash balances. The dotted lines are cash balances from previous year, and the solid line. The first line on top is the total cash for the city. The line on the bottom is the general fund cash. And as you can see in FY19, May your cash starts picking up, and because of the taxes, the personal property and real estate, it's not picking up as quite as high as it had been in previous years, but it's not dipping down low. So we're comfortable with that, where our cash balance is. We also sold bonds last week, and so we should have the revenue in from the bonds on June 17th, so the cash should be fine. So in summary, our cash balances are at appropriate level. Actual impact on local revenues is a little bit uncertain still. The delayed penalties impact the predictability of that. Our expenditure savings are occurring. We are having some additional COVID expenditures, but we also have a CARES Fund briefing, and we have the $39.3 million that we received from CARES Fund. We will have that briefing to you next week, with the public hearing the following week on the CARES Act money. And as I said, we just closed the books on Friday, so we didn't have the full interim report. We will have that to you on Friday. Our next steps, as I just said, is the CARES funding recommendations. We'll have a June preliminary on July 21st. We'll have a July update for FY21 and an FY20 update on August 25th, and then an FY21 August update on September 15th. Be happy to answer any
Hey,
questions.
great. Any questions? Okay,
Just
Mr. Tower.
one, Alice, do you expect that we'll get something in our Friday package on the CARES Act? briefing?
Yes,
Okay.
we will have a briefing for you on that.
Thank you.
Hey, anybody else? Ms. Wilson?
Do we have any sense of how the hotels are doing this month at all with the advertising? I mean, I know Sunday, there was a lot of activity at the oceanfront and a lot of people.
So on the slide that shows the hotel, the sales assessments and versus the collection, you see the sales assessments going up. And so I think they are starting to have some movement in where they're getting more.
Yeah, there's a
Revenue
lot of
coming in.
activity. It's not like a something in the water weekend, but.
No, I mean, it's not going to be as good as last year, but.
No, but it's really good to see people out there, and I see a lot of families.
Right.
And they love it when I walk my dog.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Leahy.
Councilwoman Wilson, I would just add that anecdotally, Deputy City Manager Ron Williams has indicated some pretty good numbers over the weekend at the resort area,
Good.
higher than maybe people would have thought initially.
Oh, yeah, it was very busy this weekend.
Okay, great.
Thank you very
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, moving on, Mr. Leahy.
Yes, sir. Next up, a few meetings ago, I cannot remember exactly when, you approved a property sale at the Princess Anne Athletic Complex for related to the Avangrid Kitty Hawk Wind project. And that would be a transfer station where they would take wind energy and get it into the grid where the power lines that move through the complex right now. You have an item coming up on your agenda next week in which Avangrid now would like a non-exclusive franchise, because when they come ashore with these power lines, they then have to use our right-of-ways to get those power lines to the Princess Anne Athletic Complex. And so Public Works, Bobby Wheeler, is going to give you a little idea about what we're talking about, so when you see this item next week, you're not, it won't surprise you.
Great, thank you. Hey, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. This agreement is going to support the Kitty Hawk Wind LLC's offshore wind project by allowing installation of electrical power supply cabling within the city streets and right-of-ways to designated substations that will serve corresponding power grids. If you recall, in 2018, and this was reaffirmed in 2019, City Council adopted a resolution in support of and a commitment to the creation of an offshore wind energy industry. And as the city manager referenced, in early this year, 2018, you approved the sale of 20 acres of property in Princess Anne Commons to Avangrid Renewables, who is the parent company of Kitty Hawk Wind LLC, for development of a wind energy substation. Next slide. So who is Avangrid Renewables? Avangrid Renewables is the parent company of Kitty Hawk LLC. They're part of a larger group called Iberdrola, which is a large international corporation that has a history and a reputation as a global energy leader, a leading producer of wind power, and one of the world's biggest electrical utilities. They build, they operate, and they provide electrical power generated from offshore wind energy. They've secured a leasehold interest in approximately 123,000 acres of ocean located about 27 miles off the coast of the Outer Banks to develop a wind farm. Their intention is to harness that energy from wind turbine generators and from an offshore substation, deliver electrical power to a landing point off Virginia Beach coast and Sandbridge to designated substations. This is one of the first offshore wind energy projects in the nation. It's projected to yield approximately $70 million in taxable investment and income, and there's a potential to create managerial, professional, and technical job opportunities. Next slide. So in addition to the 20 acres that have been acquired, Avangrid has also secured an option agreement for an additional 30 acres in corporate landing from the Virginia Beach Development Authority. Both parcels will be used for construction of the substations. Design of the substations, particularly the one in Princess Anne Commons, will conform to their architectural guidelines. High voltage electrical transmission lines, fiber optic cabling from a landing point off the city's coast in Sandbridge will be rerouted to these substations. And again, the franchise agreement will allow them to do this. Next slide. This slide is just to give you a frame of reference of where the parcel is located. On the left, you have the Princess Anne Commons parcel. It's adjacent to Dam Neck Road and west of the existing ball fields. To the right, you have the corporate landing parcel, and it's in the vicinity of the northwest quadrant of General Route Boulevard and Corporate Landing Parkway, and it abuts the Geico property. Next slide. So the location and placement of the transmission lines and cabling is subject to completion of engineering designs. The lines will be placed primarily underground with overhead crossings where environmental conditions and regulatory agencies dictate otherwise. As with all city franchise agreements, necessary permits and approvals for work in the city's right-of-way will be required. This project has the ability to generate electricity to power approximately 700,000 homes. Next slide. This is just to illustrate the approximate location of the substations and the landing and the cabling route. Again, the final locations and the route are not fixed. That'll be determined by some engineering designs. The high-power transmission lines are going to generate thermal energy that will need to be dissipated, and measures will be incorporated into the design to address these. Next slide. This is a good illustration of how all the components come together. It gives you a general understanding of how the offshore wind projects work, how all the components are interconnected to each other, from the wind turbine generators to the delivery of electricity to the power grids. Avangrid's current schedule for construction of the project is slated to begin in the 24-25 time period, with 5 to 8 years for construction build-out. Next slide. So the main terms of the non-exclusive franchise agreement are shown on this slide. The initial term is 20 years, with 2 additional 10 years from a maximum of 40 years as permitted by law. For renewable generator project, there is a right-of-way use fee of $1,500 per mile or any portion thereof as required by the Code of Virginia. If any infrastructure improvements are constructed, if there is a potential conflict with a future CIP project, then the relocation or removal will be at their sole expense. However, the city has agreed to make every attempt to mitigate those circumstances given the nature of the proposed improvements. Upon termination of the agreement, the improvements are required to be removed, or the city may elect to take ownership. Next slide. So this is not something new, the non-exclusive franchise agreement. We've got over 20 active similar agreements with various service providers that are permitted the use of the city's right-of-way and streets, as you can see. However, what is notable is that this is the first wind energy company franchise, and that a use fee is prescribed by Virginia law. And most importantly, we have to treat Avangard in the same manner as we do the others. Next slide. This is just a statutory code compliance section that illustrates and applies to co-location of renewable energy facilities in public right-of-way and streets. Article B makes reference to section 671103, and that's where the $1,500 use fee is defined. Next slide. So in conclusion, I've identified some of the completed things that have happened. The RFP was posted for the bids because the initial term of the franchise did exceed 5 years. The first public meeting was held on the same night, which was last Tuesday. I think there were no speakers in opposition. So moving forward, I understand council would like another public meeting to be held after this briefing today. And that hearing time is not determined at this point. So with that said, that concludes my presentation.
Okay, any questions? Mrs. Henley?
Well, we were just beginning to talk about this just before COVID hit. I really don't like the fact that we haven't been able to be out making public presentations about this. If we get to have a Princess Anne District Forum the fourth Thursday in June, I hope you'll be one on the agenda, because I think it's important for people to know, what we're talking about. I had just met with these folks from Kitty Hawk just before all of this other stuff happened. We know about Dominion Energy out there going to do the wind energy, but this is North Carolina. And it's so mind-boggling to think that we're going to be the location for both of those facilities, and what it's really going to mean potentially in the future is really amazing. But I'm sure that there are a lot of folks who don't understand all of this, and I certainly don't. I've got a lot to learn. But that we're talking about two different wind energy situations here and what it's going to mean. But particularly with this one coming ashore in the Sandbridge area, that's frightening to folks, I'm afraid. But I want everybody to understand what it's going to mean. So as soon as we can start having some public meetings again, I would really like to set something up that we can tell people this is all going to be underground and it's going to be in but it's pretty amazing what you're talking about here, but we've really got to get the public informed. And I don't like doing it after we voted on it, but it's sort of the way it's with everything else. It's kind of been the way that we've been doing things. We just haven't been able to have these public presentations the way we normally would. So I hope everybody knows we're going to do a lot of talking about this before it really happens.
Just for clarification, are you making reference to an outside public meeting like we do with normal CIP projects? Just want to understand that.
I'm sorry.
Just for clarification, are you requesting that we set up a public meeting as we do with
To be at the district forum.
the district forum? Okay.
I hope we'll have. We haven't been able to have one since February. But this would have been one of those topics that we would have talked about at one of those forums had we been having them. But I'd like for you, if we get to have one in June, would like for you to have a 10 or 15-minute spot on it. We're going to have a lot to cover.
Sure, I'm not personally working on it, but I'll be glad to be there. I'll work with Economic
Okay.
Development, Taylor.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
Could you give us a little bit more information about the details of the leases, 20-plus, your purchase of 20 acres of city-owned property, Prince Anne Commons, and the 30-acre, looks like an option to lease it or purchase it?
Yeah, let me have Taylor address that. He's been working with it.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Vice Mayor, Council. I want to thank Bobby and his team for their work pulling this together, and also want to thank Mr. Stiles' team, and specifically Debbie Bryan on his team for her work on this project thus far. But Councilmember Jones, the two land option sales agreements relate to the taxable substations that have to be built. And so one of the things that's new for us is building electric power substations that are taxable. We anticipate that the value of the two projects, one at on a parcel in the back of Corporate Landing, that option is already done, and one adjacent to Dam Neck, close to just south of the amphitheater. Those two, we believe, generate between $70 and $300 million worth of new taxable infrastructure for the at the personal property rate for the city. And those agreements are already booked. This project, or this franchise agreement, allows us to bring the power onshore and connect it to those substations, which would then go down the high transmission line to the larger substation near Fentress.
And what's the time frame on these options?
Those options, right off the top of my head, I believe that those are 5-year options with one option to renew for a total of 10. But allow me to confirm that for you. I don't have that document in front of me. I apologize for that, but I'll get that confirmed, and we'll get that information to you shortly.
And this is land in the Princess Anne Commons?
Yes, sir. We worked with our colleagues at Park and Rec to identify a parcel that was suitable. We ensured that this use was compatible with what they had planned adjacent to it, and also was not in their immediate expansion plan in the future. And so,
what was the price?
The price on that, I want to say that we are in we're in the neighborhood of $100,000 an acre in there, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Wilson?
So I'm really curious that this is going to be a major construction for all of these turbines. Is that going to benefit us for the, coming through here and the supply of all of those? Is that going to help us any at all?
Councilmember, we sure hope so. This is certainly one of the opportunities that we think is most exciting for our community, and not just for our community, for our entire region and for the Commonwealth. And so I will tell you what we are finding is we are accustomed to recruiting existing businesses to come here and locate. This is standing up an industry. It is believed that there is $100 billion worth of offshore wind that can be constructed 24 to 26 miles offshore up and down the east coast of the United States. We generally believe, and our colleagues at both Hampton Roads Economic Development as well as the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, believe that the first company or the first community to land this industry will be the place where it grows up in the United States. And so where we think there's 10 to 15 years worth of construction that can happen once this gets rolling, the thing that we're most excited about is there's a 25 to 30 year operation and maintenance function that's got to happen somewhere, and we think that we are a prime location for that. So
It's
yes.
not only the Kitty Hawk, but also the Dominion Energy. So there's going to be two major entities right off the coast with Virginia, North Carolina, located right here.
Yes, ma'am, that's right. So these are twin 2.5 gigawatt projects, as you saw from Bobby's slide just a moment ago. Each of these will power between 650 and 700,000 homes. So this is a tremendous amount of energy and a tremendous opportunity for our community.
Okay, Mrs. Henley?
I believe I'm right. Kitty Hawk is far ahead of Dominion Energy. And Dominion is really going to just be doing the one or two things that they're going to put out there, but this one is ready to go.
So, yes, ma'am. Dominion actually has two projects going, but you are correct. This project is ahead of the Dominion project in the PJM Interconnect queue, which is the process by which these projects will access the grid. Dominion has two projects running. They have the Orsted test project where there are two turbines being built very near their larger site. They have announced their larger project now, so we treat it as we say that it is a reality, and we think it is moving forward. But you are correct, the North Carolina project is ahead in the PJM Interconnect queue.
Mr. Tower?
I just wanted to make a comment, really, and it's not so much for Mr. Wheeler or Taylor's comments, but just the idea about meetings. I know Ms. Henley has regular meetings and is used to doing that, and I think it's a great idea. But I'm concerned that we are not offering the various committees and boards and that are in this area the opportunity to have meetings virtually. I think we are not taking full advantage of the technology that is available there to communicate, because I find, I mean, I'm one of the people that have a health condition that makes me concerned about going to meetings in person with large numbers of people. But I attend regularly, almost on a daily basis, lots of meetings, mostly by Zoom, some by WebEx, and maybe I've attended with some others. I think it's here to stay myself, not necessarily as a replacement for in-person meetings, but as an adjunct. I don't think this is something that's going away, and I think the world is going to use this. There are lots of reasons to do it. It is inexpensive, it's safe, at least safe in a health-wise, and I think great strides are being made to make it safe in a cybersecurity sense. And I would just hope, and I guess my comments are urged for the city manager, really, that I hope we've got people in the city technical staff who are looking at this in the longer term. There was an article in the New York Times this weekend about interviewed 518 epidemiologists, I believe, about what they personally were going to do, how their personal feelings were about doing various activities given the present COVID sense. And it really made a huge impression that this situation is not going away anytime soon. And I think even if it were going away sometime soon, the testing of this meetings by virtual has kind of sunk in with a lot of folks, and we can offer a lot better communication with our citizens, to us, to others that we are affiliated with. And I hope we'll take a lead in doing that. I'm not trying to eliminate in-person meetings. I like them as much as the next person, but I'm concerned that we may be under limitations of doing that for some time to come. And I apologize for making you stand there and listen to that, gentlemen, but I just thought it was a good time to say it.
Thank you, Mr. Tower. Okay, anyone else at this point? Okay, we're looking
Thank you, Mayor.
forward to moving forward.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mayor, members of council, our last item under city manager's briefing is the pending planning items. And I'd like to ask Bill Lanfair from planning and Kevin Kemp will be standing will be on standby for the planning items, Glenn.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Kevin and I will be taking you through those planning items that the City Council will be reviewing on June 16th and 23rd. The first item is that of Gold Petal Farms. This is a conditional use permit for a recreation facility of an outdoor nature. The proposed conditional use permit will allow for a sunflower maze and cut flower field on the property of the Wave Church located on Seaboard Road. This will be a seasonal business operating from April to June. Operating hours will be limited during the time of church services. No structures are proposed. The existing church parking will be accommodating the customers. No known opposition to this application.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
It says the seasonal business is from April to June. That's only 2 months.
Correct, right.
Is that right?
That is correct, right. So they will be growing. Obviously, this year, they've missed the window of opportunity. Once the field is established, then apparently the field is only in prime condition for several months for the picking of the flowers. But it'll take a little while for it to actually grow up. It takes about 6 weeks for the field to grow up.
If it's a maze, I don't think this is going to work. I think it's a different time frame. I think we really need to see if that's accurate.
Okay. We'll verify that, ma'am.
Okay.
Next item is that of Danny and Patricia Martin, Brian and Arlene Martin, and Robert and Natalie Faison. This is a conditional rezoning, B2 Community Business District to conditional R5R Residential Resort District. The property is located within the Shore Drive corridor within the Bayside District. The property was originally zoned to CL3 Limited Commercial in the 1950s. And now the property owners are seeking the conditional rezoning to construct a 3-story duplex comparable to existing residential uses along Surrey Road. Given the irregular shape of the property, it does not meet the minimum requirements for the R5R Residential Resort District. Therefore, the applicant is requesting deviations to lot area and lot width to provide sufficient buffering and screening along Shore Drive, as well as to prevent any further access onto Shore Drive. A fence and evergreen shrubs will be installed. There is no known opposition to this application. Next item is number 3, Stephanie Guthrie, who is requesting a conditional use permit for a residential kennel. The applicant is seeking this conditional use permit to accommodate 6 companion dogs that are kept primarily indoors as pets. The applicant recently became aware of the need for a conditional use permit when seeking to license the dogs. There is no history of animal control-related violations on the property. There's no known opposition, and 4 letters of support have been received. Next application is that of Jeffrey Franklin for a conditional use permit for a commercial kennel. According to the property owner, the applicant is no longer interested in pursuing this conditional use permit, and as such is requesting a withdrawal of the application. Next application is that of Spence Crossing Properties, LLC. This is a conditional rezoning from conditional B4 to conditional PDH2. The applicant is seeking to rezone the remaining 14.5 acres of commercially zoned property within the Spence Crossing development. They're doing this in response to market conditions. This will allow them to construct 224 multifamily residential units in 8 3-story garden flats and 8 2-story quad buildings. The proposed residences are similar to the existing architecture found in other Spence Crossing neighborhoods. A minimum of 27.5% open space is proposed, which exceeds the minimum requirement of 15% for the zone, and is greater than the 17% overall open space found throughout the Spence Crossing community. Proposed vehicle access will be from a signalized intersection on South Independence Boulevard. With the elimination of the commercial development, the average daily trips will be substantially reduced from this property, resulting in less overall traffic on nearby roadways. The development and associated imperviousness will be consistent with the previously approved master drainage study for Spence Crossing. An existing series of interconnected ponds will provide quality and quantity treatment for the development. While there were no speakers at the Planning Commission hearing, staff did hear from a number of citizens opposed to the application. Generally, they are residents who bought into the Spence Crossing neighborhood because of the prospect of commercial development and are now disappointed that that won't be the case. The Planning Commission placed this on the consent agenda. The next 3 items are ordinances. Items 6, 7, and 8, amendments to the site plan ordinance, subdivision, and zoning ordinance to properly reference the updated Public Works Design Standards Manual. Public Works staff briefed City Council on the proposed update of these design standards back on June 2nd. When City Council adopts the proposed changes to the Public Works Design Standards Manual, these proposed amendments are required to assure the correct standards are referenced throughout the various development codes. No substantive changes are proposed with these amendments other than the correct manual reference. Item 9, this ordinance adopts the sea level rise adaptation strategy into the comprehensive plan and amends the plan for housekeeping items to update references for the sea level rise study underway. This is a first step in integrating flood adaptation planning throughout all city planning processes and decision frameworks. Are there any questions?
Okay, any questions at this point? Nope.
In that case, I will now turn it over to the zoning administrator, Kevin Kemp, to take you through the agenda for June 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I'll briefly take you through 10 items for short-term rentals that are scheduled on the June 23rd agenda. All these items were heard by Planning Commission this past March. There are 3 districts all represented in this, Beach, Lynn Haven, and Bayside. Just to give you an idea, 4 of the items are in the North End overlay and 3 are in the Old Beach. Of the 10 items, 5 of these items were recommended for approval by both staff and council, 2 for denial by both staff and commission, and 3 were recommended for denial by staff and then approval by Planning Commission. I will get into more detail on those as we get to those items. First item is a short-term rental for a property. 1 duplex in the Bayside area is directly adjacent to the Chesapeake Bay. It is an area of the city where short-term rentals are common. And when I say this, in close proximity throughout this presentation, we're pulling about a quarter-mile radius. So within about a quarter-mile radius of the site, there's 26 short-term rentals registered and 4 CUPs currently under review. The dwelling itself has 2 bedrooms, so 2 parking spaces are required. Both spaces are provided in the driveway. All other requirements of the ordinance can reasonably met, and staff and planning commission have both recommended approval. The next 2 items are for 2 units in a duplex. These are in the North End overlay on 83rd Street. Again, within close proximity to the site, there's 15 registered short-term rentals and 3 others currently in review. Each of the duplex units has 2 bedrooms for 4 total spaces required. Those spaces are all provided in front of the dwelling. The dwelling is located on the S-curve of Shore Drive. However, there is ample distance where the vehicles can maneuver so that they don't have to back out onto Shore Drive. This was a consideration we looked into. There is actually 22 feet between the edge of the right-of-way line and where the street begins. Both staff and planning commission recommended approval of both these items. 4th item is a short-term rental request for 1 unit of an existing duplex. This is also in the North End. There are 16 registered short-term rentals within close proximity and 1 other under review. The unit itself has 3 bedrooms. All the parking is accommodated in front of the dwelling. One of the spaces overhangs the right-of-way line slightly, but it does not block vehicular or pedestrian access, and is clearly in an area designated as the driveway. Both staff and planning commission recommended approval of this item. The 5th item is for 1 unit, also of a duplex in the North End overlay. Within close proximity, there are 18 registered short-term rentals. The unit itself is a 3-bedroom unit. All 3 spaces are provided in the space shown there in front of the dwelling. 2 of the spaces overhang the property line and 1 is parallel behind. However, if you look at where it is located, it is towards the dead-end street. It doesn't block vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic, and it is clearly in an area that's designated as a driveway.
Okay, Mr. Wood has a question.
Yeah, Mr. Wood?
So you're saying B3, you're considering a parking space? Can you have that
Yes.
up? So go to B. So that B3, which blocks definitely B1, B2, and probably A1. Okay. That's fine.
Yes. The thought is that it would block the 2 spaces designated for that unit so that if you're staying in the same unit, maneuvering the vehicles would be possible.
So question for Mr. Stiles then. If there is a, so if there's like 3 bedrooms and we're required to have 3 parking spaces, if they can only come up with 2 parking spaces, can we limit them to 2 bedrooms? Or is it based on however many bedrooms the house has?
I think I believe as long as you have a proper zoning consideration for your action, you can impose such conditions as you believe are appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The 6th item is a short-term rental request for a townhome located in a development on the west edge of the Shadow Lawn neighborhood. This is also an area of the city where you've seen a lot of short-term rental requests. There are 24 registered short-term rentals, 3 currently under review, and 2 have been already approved in this development. This is an item where staff and planning commission both recommended denial based on a shortage of parking. The unit itself has 3 bedrooms, only 2 spaces were provided. As shown out in front of the unit, no alternative parking solution was presented. And because of the design of the development, there's no on-street parking. So as mentioned, staff and planning commission both recommended denial of this application. 7th item is a request for short-term rental within 1 unit of a duplex dwelling. This is in the Central Beach area. It's in close proximity to the oceanfront and the Vibe District. It is very common for short-term rentals there. We have 75 registered short-term rentals in close proximity, 13 others currently under review, and 3 have been approved by council in that area. This is the other application where staff and planning commission recommended denial based on a shortage in parking. This is a relatively new unit constructed in 2006. It is a 5-bedroom unit. Their proposal has 5 spaces, but only 3 of them are on site, 2 in the driveway, 1 in the garage. The other 2 are in the right-of-way, which is a 20-foot alley at the rear of the property, which they access. Staff feels that parking on that alley would inhibit vehicular access to the alley and thus did not approve the alternative parking plan, recommended denial, as did Planning Commission.
Yeah, Mr. Wood.
So this is another example. This is I can't speak. This looks similar to the other one with these, perpendicular parking spaces. And so the other one was recommended for approval, and this was recommended for denial. We've got other ones that are parking in the right-of-way, and they're recommended for approval, and this is recommended for denial. Just seems like there's not a lot of consistency here, and I think we need to have a policy and stick to it, because I can see why this one's recommended for denial, certainly, but I can't see why some of these others aren't. So, I think we need to do something about the consistency here.
Thank you. All right. Item 8 is a short-term rental request for a new single-family home within the Old Beach community. In the close proximity, there are 65 registered short-term rentals, 13 under review, and 4 have been approved by you. The request itself is for a 3-bedroom, single-family home. All 3 spaces are provided on site. This is one of the items that was recommended for denial by staff and approval by Planning Commission. Staff's recommendation of denial was based on that it is new construction, and staff felt that because it was a new home and that construction hadn't started, that the design could be modified to accommodate all 3 spaces without having to use that garage. Planning Commission recommended approval. I will also note that this development of the property received Board of Zoning Appeals variances to several dimensional requirements.
Who's the builder?
The builder was Bouchard LLC.
Yeah, please.
I hate to keep harping on this, but, so in this case, the staff says you can't use garage parking, but in these other ones, the staff is saying you can use garage parking.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes,
Right.
correct.
This is another example of the consistency issue I think we have here, that we need to apply the same standards across the board. And again, I've made it very clear, I don't like the garage parking idea anyway, because I don't think people use it. But I mean, if we're saying you can use it, then you need to be able to use it in new construction as well as existing.
Okay, Mr. Tower?
I don't see the garage, I see exactly the garage issue. That to me seems, it cries out for consistency, because a garage is a garage is a garage, and lots of them are going to be blocked unless it's not blocked and blocked. I guess you could make that distinction. But the parking one, I assume the distinction is, it's in the right of way, but we don't think it's going to bother anybody. It doesn't block any pedestrians, doesn't block any vehicular traffic. But that's not the way we have treated the ones that have come before. I mean, I think I agree with you on the consistency, but I think you can argue the consistency on the right-of-way one.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about the garage piece on this, because, there's staff's main reason for recommending denial is the fact they're using the garage, when in fact, they tell people they can use garage on everyone else.
What's your response to that, if you don't mind?
My response in the way that staff reviewed this application, and it will pertain to the next two as well, is that we looked at it as this property required Board of Zoning Appeals variances to develop. So they were maxing out the property using a variance application to do so. And in that case, providing additional relief on top of that to accommodate the parking for the short-term rental use, was too much. And that was how staff looked at it. you. The last two items are actually on the property directly north of the last property. And this is a property also in the Old Beach community. It is being developed with 2 single-family dwellings. And at the risk of repeating myself, staff recommended denial, Planning Commission recommended approval for the same reasons as the last application, that there were Board of Zoning Appeals variances to develop the property, and that we felt that on new construction, the requirement could be met without having to use an alternate parking plan. And that concludes the 10 that will be considered.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Council.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stiles, at this point, we're scheduled to, start the special session at 4 o'clock. Would it be appropriate to do the reading and the agenda review and then read the recess, or do we have to wait till 4 o'clock?
I believe, well, are you still expecting Mr. Moss?
Yeah, that's the thing, the thing is, I want to hold the, the closed session till at least 4 o'clock. But would it be appropriate to at least do this reading of the special and the agenda review now, or should we defer everything till 4 o'clock?
Well, I think you're voted to go into closed. If Mr. Moss is going to be in closed, should have everybody present. So
That is correct.
I wouldn't do that now. If you wanted to call the special meeting to order and do
The agenda review now?
the agenda review, although Mr. Moss may have issues to discuss on that as well. It's your discretion as chair.
Okay, so under,
Okay, I got to read the.
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll tell you what, if it's okay, with the agenda, if we could just do the consent agenda and stuff, but we will definitely hold for the special session, okay? So, would that be, okay. Yes, Mrs.
Would it be
Henley?
appropriate for us to have a council comment on an item that came to us last week that I know it's not on our agenda. This was on our desk last week, and I was going to ask something about it.
Yeah, but this,
We don't have council comment on the agenda, so
yeah, we don't have, this is a special meeting, so,
Well, you can entertain that during the workshop if you choose.
Okay,
Because the
I'll tell you
workshop
what,
is
we're
not a
still.
special meeting. That's a
Okay, well,
regularly-
we're still in workshop,
Yeah.
okay, so.
we had this on our desk last week. It's from several property owners in Aragona around the cemetery that's there. I believe it's Jones Cemetery, although it's not yours, I don't think.
Nothing to do with it.
I know that Edna Hendricks knows more about this cemetery than anybody I know, and I've worked with her now for a number of years on our cemetery project that we had hoped to publish this year, but it's another casualty of COVID. But I know Edna had brought to me, and we had met just before all this. I had a lot of meetings just before all this started. There's some state money available from some pot to make improvements to African-American cemeteries that we weren't able to access last year, but we might be able to access it this year. Could we investigate that and see if there is something available, and maybe it would be something that we could use in this case to not only help the neighbors around, but also to improve that situation?
Yes, ma'am. No, I'll pursue that.
Thank you.
May I?
Yeah, Mr. Jones.
Now, this is a privately owned cemetery.
Yes,
And so the issue I think that we may be dealing with here is, can we use that money to improve a privately owned cemetery? It's not a publicly owned cemetery. It's owned by an individual, as I understand it. And they're not getting along with the neighbors. So what's the story on that, Mr. Stiles?
Mr. Jones, to be candid with you, I don't believe I got the package that you all got, and so I haven't had an opportunity to review it. I will be happy to do so and to give you my comments
This was
afterwards.
just sort of a petition and some neighborhood concerns, but I believe that funding, I mean, I guess most of these, or many of them would be on private property, so I'm just thinking that it's whatever the state has decided is eligible for this pot of money, I think. If we could investigate it and see if it's still available and.
Yes, ma'am, I will get a copy of that package, and I will look at it along with Mr. Leahy, and we will report back to you.
If I may, Ms. Henley, are you?
Oh, sure, go ahead. I'll get a copy for you. You have
One of the concerns here is that on this cemetery, and I'm probably the staff already knows this, but is the neighbors are complaining about rodents that dwell in the trees. There are apparently tree rats. I didn't realize there were such a thing as tree rats, but apparently there are, and they're pretty big, apparently. And they're going over into the neighborhood and digging in holes in people's yards and all that kind of thing. And the neighbors are, beside themselves as to what they can do to require, what can be done to require the owners of this cemetery to try to do something about the rodents that exist there and that are coming into their yards and gnawing holes into the sides of their houses and things like that. And so I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I sure would like to hear an answer. So you could look into it.
Something needs to be
Appreciate it.
done, yeah.
We'll look into it, get back to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, if it's okay, I'll do the reading, and then if we can do the consent agenda, and then we can recess, and, do the call for the recess. Okay, and then the council will get a break. Okay, honorable members of City Council, in accordance with the Virginia Beach Code 2-21 and the authority invested in me as mayor of the city of Virginia Beach, I hereby call for a special formal session meeting of the Virginia Beach City Council, Tuesday, June 9th, 2020, 4 p.m., City Council Chamber, Building 1, City Hall, second floor, 2401 Courthouse Drive. This special formal session will follow the regularly scheduled workshop, which starts at 1:30. The purpose of this special formal session is for City Council to hold agenda review, convene into closed session, and then at 6 o'clock consider the items listed on the published agenda. Citizens may comment either in person or virtually. If you would like to speak to in person on the public hearing or planning items, call the city clerk's office at 757-385-4303 and sign up. Be advised that there is a limited seating available in city council chambers to assure social distancing as recommended by the CDC. If you wish to make comments virtually on a public hearing or planning item, please follow the two-step process below. One, registered for the WebEx at https://vbgov@.webex.com. And the other way is to register with the city clerk's office by calling 757-385-4303 or via email at abarnes@vbgov.com prior to 5:30 p.m. on June 6, 2020. This special formal session will be broadcast on cable TV, www.vbgov.com, and Facebook Live. Citizens are encouraged to submit their comments to the City Council prior to the special meeting via email at citycouncil@vbgov.com. Sincerely, Bobby Dyer, Mayor. Okay. Okay, no, we don't need a roll because we know who's present.
Yes, the only person absent is Mr. Moss, Councilmember Moss. It'll be fine.
Okay, but once again, we will do things. So at this point, can we do the agenda review?
Okay, under ordinances, resolutions, we have a single item, Resolution 1, regarding referring to Planning Commission for ordinances regarding short-term rentals. Is everybody okay with putting that on consent?
On A, I think the penalties recommended are really, really high. I would prefer for the planning commission to look at it and come back with recommendations of, rather than what's set there. I just think they're really high.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, Mr. Tower?
I would just say, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not familiar with this referral process. It's the first time I've encountered it since I've been on council. But I'm not opposed to any direction to the planning commission because I'm doing this one really at the request of staff. I'm more interested in the other parts of it.
I mean, I don't mind civil penalty.
I'm happy to have them take a look at the entire situation, come back with whatever recommendations they
Yeah.
want, and I'm just not sure
Yeah, I thought
how
that
to
was really
achieve
nice.
that.
We would look at it and then come back with some recommendations.
Okay,
But if this is the method by which we have to get to them, I'm fine with it.
So if I can, Mr. Stiles, on this, it appears then, if I'm looking at ordinance to amend section 104 of the city zoning ordinance to allow civil penalties for the violation of section 241.2, the underlined item is the only change? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow your question, sir.
Okay, so when we're looking at this ordinance to amend section 104 of the city zoning ordinance to allow civil penalties for the violation of section 241.2, that document, which is A, 1A here. When I look at the actual backup document, there's something that's underlined under B. And typically, when y'all do this, underline means that's language that was added, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So are you, Ms. Wilson, then what are you asking it to do? Because
Well, I'm asking
this
that-
has existing penalties in it. So how do we get around that?
Those are the penalties that where
Right.
civil penalties are currently assessable. That is the amount of the penalty. So you would need to rewrite it to create a different civil penalty for violations of an STR.
And that's what I'm trying to do, is figure out if we're going to craft something to send to the planning commission. Is it going to say then that, because then we're talking about just redoing all the penalties in this, because these penalties are currently in place. These aren't new penalties.
No, they're not.
Ms. Wilson, what is the criminal penalty if you proceed criminally?
I believe it's, some of them are unclassified misdemeanors, they're $2,000.
So these civil penalties, they don't have a criminal penalty attached to them. And also, I think they're actually lower than than what the criminal penalty could be if imposed by the court. But it's all certainly something that the planning commission can take up, and it will come back to you with the recommendation. And with that recommendation, you still have the opportunity to do with it whatever you choose to do with it when it comes back to you. This is just, the intent was just to simply make civil penalties an option.
Okay.
Are you good with it then?
Yeah, Mrs. Henley?
No, go ahead. Were you finished with your question?
No, I just wanted to make sure if I could put it in there, so.
Well, just two things that I'm a question about this. When we were talking before about how to do short-term rentals in places, and we talked about creating short-term rental overlay districts, that should not be confused with those existing overlays. I mean, these existing overlays are there for other purposes. And so are we now saying that we're going to create a short-term rental overlay district in these places? But we had talked about if we did that, it needed to be by request of the people. And we talked about certain percentages that we might require to be requesting that. So are we thinking to make the current Old Beach overlay district, which is an overlay district for design and other purposes, now make it a short-term rental overlay district, but not require it to be at the request of the residents?
Mr. Tower?
Well, of course, the entire city is a short-term overlay district at the moment. It's applies, the ordinance and applies across the city. So this is not, and it's obviously not intended to encourage short-term rentals in the Old Beach overlay. It's a method of limiting the number, perhaps, although you can't foresee what people are going to do, but it at least limits absentee ownership and hopefully the occupancy of those houses during a significant period of the year. So it's not an attempt to make it, I mean, I guess it is a short-term overlay because it would have a special rule regarding short-term rentals, but it's not one where you have to approve it. Again, I have no difficulty with having a voting provision to do it because of the COVID situation. It's been impossible for that Resort Beach Civic League, which includes that, to have a meeting to discuss it. I've discussed it with a few people. They have concerns about it as well. Not that they object to it, but when I talked to them, I said, look, I'm just trying to get something going, because if we don't, at the rate we're going, it may be too late to protect the neighborhood in the way that you guys want to. So, but my understanding is that the Planning Commission can, and I hope they will, take a look at it and make any changes that they or the public or choose to make. They'll send it back to us. We'll have the full opportunity again to have the public and discussions among ourselves. This is just a method to get it back to the Planning Commission, and it's for an area that I think is the most vulnerable area to being kind of overrun, for lack of a better word, with short-term rentals against the will of the neighborhood who wants to preserve the character of the neighborhood. So that's why it's just for Old Beach, but I'm happy to have other areas that wanted to join in as well. But for me to invent the system on my own or try to burden council with it when it was going to be referred back to Planning Commission anyway, who are very interested in this issue. They are educated about it just as we are. It seemed to me the best thing to do with the consultation with staff was to develop a simple plan, send it back to the commission, and make it clear that I, as the sponsor, welcome amendments, friendly amendments of any kind that they choose to make, and we'll look forward to them.
I love that word, simple plan. Good luck.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Stiles, did you have something? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just had another comment. I just wanted to make certain we hadn't lost that idea of it being at the request of the people, but anyway, just to revive that. And the other thing, on the civil penalties, that sort of gets to the enforcement angle, which we are sadly lacking in at this point. Mm-hmm. And, we discussed it, I think, last meeting or so, and I asked that we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 step of how neighbors complain, and, we're not sure whether it's 311 or just what. And I'm also very concerned that we did not approve any inspectors in this budget if we're going to continue to approve short-term rentals. So, when I'm getting these emails sent to me with these problem places, I don't really know who to send it to say, could you all investigate this? Because we really don't have our enforcement laid out quite yet. And that's something we really have to address. If we're going to establish civil penalties, how do we establish that somebody has done something wrong? Where's the reporting aspect, and how's that going to be done? I think maybe that's something we might need to work on, not the planning department or planning commission. But don't forget, we don't have a good enforcement system in place at this point.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bellucci.
Well, thank you. I share some of the concerns mentioned about civil penalties. And for my interest is more about the compatibility of short-term rentals in neighborhoods than it is about the penalties themselves. And I've heard from a lot of people who share those concerns about penalties, and I can give you some examples just briefly. For example, if a person operates a short-term rental in a home that they occupy most of the time, then they could face civil penalties for not taking out their trash that, for example, their neighbors who do not operate a short-term rental would not be subject to. And I think that's a concern. I think our focus should be on the compatibility of short-term rentals in neighborhoods rather than the penalties themselves. And then, so I appreciate your consideration of that. And I don't know what that means, Mr. Tower. I know you're working very hard to do everything you can to address this very complex issue. But I think that sending this ordinance to planning could color their perspective could really influence their perspective of how they interpret our intent. And so I'm quite concerned about the inclusion of these penalties, these fees and fines and all of that. And then the other question that I have that perhaps Mr. Stiles can answer is, we're operating in still an emergency situation, so to speak, in that we're only allowing members of the public to speak on items that we're required to allow them to speak on. Is that correct? So I've heard from some people who would like to participate in this conversation that we've all acknowledged has been taking place for years, and we're starting to make some movement. And even acknowledging that this is going to planning for further discussion, it's not a final decision. But I still think there's a lot of people who are interested in participating in this discussion. And based on the rules on which we're operating, do they have the opportunity to do that?
Under your current speaker policy, the only time that a speaker gets to address an item coming before the council is where state law requires a public hearing. Now, for the referral ordinance, which is simply the initiation of the process, and where it will go to the planning commission, and speakers have to be allowed and will be allowed with proper notice at the planning commission, and when the item comes back with the recommendation from the planning commission, you have to have another public hearing here. So there will be at least 2 opportunities for public input regarding this issue, but neither of those would occur at the time you make the referral, based on your current policy.
Thank you for that clarification. I think we should give people the opportunity to have their voices heard through every step of this very important discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Wood.
The only thing I'd say is, the process is how that was required by law. So it does go to the planning commission. There's going to be a public hearing there. There will likely be more than one public hearing, and if history's any example for us, we will probably have multiple public hearings here as we defer this and defer it and talk about it and everything else. But I just want to say, and I think everybody needs to actually read this section here. I mean, currently, the penalty is a criminal offense. And Mr. Towers' suggestion here, and a criminal offense punishable by $1,000, $1,500, and $2,000, whereas Mr. Towers is saying, well, let's make this a civil penalty, $200 to $500, up to $5,000 in civil penalties, that sort of thing. So it's not criminal, and so it's decriminalizing this, which I think is a good idea. So I would suggest, if everybody's okay with sending this forward, that we put this on the consent agenda, because that's actually what the topic is now, and this is the only item. But if you guys want to pull it, we can discuss
Yeah,
it.
I think if we can, at this point, this is just going to, the planning commission, but it's going to come back. We will have the final decision, and as Mr. Stiles said, there will be public hearings and things, but we are the final arbiters of what goes forward. So at least for now, if it could stay on consent, and then Ms. Wooten, and then Ms. Wilson.
Well, I just want to also echo the concerns that Councilmember Berlucci brought up. I'm getting calls about that as well, about the compatibility issue. And even though you say it's a civil penalty, still people, are concerned about being charged with civil penalties. And so is there a way that we can, maybe make those, maybe in written form, or just make sure it's known that that area regarding penalties, we really need to address those concerns, before we move forward, with this whole process. So just want to, put this on the record that I'm also getting concerns about those penalties as well.
I also do, but, Ms. Wilson?
I want to talk about the next one when you're ready.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Moss.
I know I'm late today, I apologize for that, but, sometimes the submarine Navy is busy. But it was one of those days. But I do want to pick up on Mike's point, and something we always take refuge into the law as somehow that justifies a behavior. The law only sets the minimum standard by which the government must perform. Because that means if we don't follow it, citizens have a recourse. But as public servants who work for the people that we serve, we should always be looking at a much higher standard of participation than the minimal level that the law requires. So I think Councilman Belushi's point about participation and to easily dismiss that as not legally required kind of overlooks our moral obligation to the people we serve to always give them an active voice at every step in the process. And while this may remain on consent, I would hope my colleagues here that we would revisit. If that's the course we're going to, then we need to establish a policy that puts us at a higher standard than the law, so we always remember who we work for, and that those people always have a right to come here and meaningfully have an opportunity to notice, and for us to hear what they have to say. And the law is not an excuse to deny people what I think is their fundamental right to participate. And so I hope we don't find refuge in that, and in that part, I greatly support. But I understand the issue here, Mr. Mayor, but I hope we come back soon as we reopen open mic and address what is clearly a process deficiency. Because people want to be heard, even if we vote yes. They want to have adequate notice, and they want to have a right at the time where, because they might tell us, hey, we don't want this to go to the Planning Commission, and we're giving them workload that people don't support. And so I think that Mike's comment is spot on, but I understand where we're at with here, but we need to correct the shortfall. We have a bad process.
Right.
So is everybody okay with this being on consent?
And, and there will be, adequate public input and discussion on this going forward.
Okay. So, and everything else are planning items, and we have one speaker.
Wait, I want to say something about the next part of
You're still on
B.
C? Okay.
About the grandfathering.
So do you want to pull this off with consent?
No, I just wanted to
Okay.
say something about the grandfathering. When this goes to planning, I would like for them to consider, there's a couple of condos down at the oceanfront that are categorized as condo hotels. And they've been doing short-term rentals since the 70s. And Guy and I have talked about those. And there could be a unit that's not rented for a couple of years. But if there is a way, when the Planning Commission looks at those, if they can be niched out to be looked at differently than everything else. As, a single-family house isn't used for 2 years, I can understand that. But this is, they have a special classification. They're called condo hotels. In fact, they even have trouble getting a loan because they have a special classification. So if we can have the Planning Commission consider those when they're looking at this grandfathering thing. That's the only thing I'm asking. I don't mind keeping this on consent, but to consider that as part of what they're looking at with this.
Can do.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right, so every one of the planning items is in the Beach District. Do you want to hear them all?
No,
I'm sorry?
no, don't need to hear them all.
Okay.
Do we then need, well, before we vote,
We have
there
one
are some that I plan to vote no on, but I got to go through and make that notation there, and some I'm not supporting, so I want to make sure that I have that.
We have
for
a
the record.
speaker on item 2. And that's the applicant, and he still wants to speak regardless.
Correct.
So, Mr. Tower, did you want to make recommendations on them on item 1 then?
Okay, are we saying whether or not we're going to have it on the consent agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm not going to vote for any of them, and I'll just make my statement once, so you don't have to listen to it 15 times.
Okay.
I can't support these short-term rentals that have an extremely liberal set of recommendations, and I just believe they are totally out of place in residential neighborhoods, given this very broad liberal set of recommendations of 3 per bedroom, which I don't think exists anywhere else in the country, 2 per week. And we don't have an enforcement set up to be able to enforce even these liberal recommendations. And because I just don't believe what we have established is suitable in residential neighborhoods, and we don't have the system in place to try to police them, I'm not going to be supporting any of them.
So that's Mr. Moss and Ms. Henley.
That's correct.
May
I was
I
still
ask a
trying to-
question?
Okay. Okay, Mr. Jones.
Well, the first question I have is, it's my understanding on the resolution that you're talking about having on a consent agenda, and I have no problem with that. But I just, you know, and I sympathize with Mr. Tower, I'll be honest with you. He's got a situation down there in his district where his neighborhood is going to be decimated here, and not too long period of time with short-term rentals, and maybe not immediately is it going to be apparent, but over time it's going to become readily apparent that there's a deterioration of the area that he represents unless there's some type of strict rules that are put in place in order to control these short-term rentals that everybody's asking for in his area. So as far as the resolution to send it to the Planning Commission, I don't have any problem with doing that because I think it's a step towards trying to give him something to get that under control, particularly down in his district at the oceanfront. We've tried other things and we weren't able to get them passed, quite frankly, up until this point. We probably need to take another look at them, and Mr. Wood brought it up at the last meeting concerning the overlay districts that we had contemplated at one time, and we maybe need to take another look at those. But in the meantime, the resolution to refer these restrictions and these controls that he has proposed to go to the Planning Commission for consideration is, in my view, is a good move and should be done, if not for any other reason, to have some kind of temporary controls over these units that are being considered for short-term rentals, particularly in the oceanfront area. I'm with Ms. Henley. I frankly don't want to vote for any of them because I think it's premature. I think we should have the rules first and then vote on them. So I'm not going to vote for any of them for that reason, so that we don't end up in a situation where we've approved a whole bunch of short-term rentals and we don't have control over them. So, but as far as what Mr. Tower has asked for, I think he's on target. I think for what we have, he's on target trying to do something about having some controls over these short-term rentals in his district. So that's where I am. I support putting it on the consent agenda to send it to the Planning Commission because I think it's a start. But I'm not going to vote for any of these short-term rentals because I don't think we should do that until we have better control over them. So.
Yeah, Mr. Wood.
So, I'm sorry. I asked Mr. Tower what he wanted to do on these, and he never said. He just said he didn't want them on, he didn't want to hear them all. So I don't know if you.
No, I'm gonna recommend the same, I'm gonna follow the recommendations that are, on the staff recommendations on all of them for approval. I'm gonna move for approval of all of them except the number 15.
So that's a no on 15.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with 15. That's consent for denial. Is everybody okay for that?
Yep.
Even the folks that are voting?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll vote for denial.
So consent for denial. Okay, item 1, Elizabeth Ann Gregory, 635 South Atlantic Avenue. Okay. Number 2, Donald, well, he wants to speak. Number 3, Martin Playstead, VB Getaway at 1738 Baltic. Number 4, Martin Playstead, 338 25th and a half. 5, Hanger Holdings, 20712. 6, Mary Ann Cox, 905D Pacific Avenue. 7, Steve Gorham, 325 25th Street. 8, Richard Fleming, 2937 Arctic Avenue. 9, Justice Swango, JAG Investments, 521 Carolina Avenue. I'm going to be voting no on this one. This is the one with that driveway issue, so I'm going to personally be voting no on that one.
Me too.
Me too.
Okay, so that's,
That's denial.
Well, that's,
3,
That would be denial.
5.
okay, so we'll go ahead and pull that one. Do we have is the applicant signed up for this one?
I will need to check with Terry, I'm sorry.
Okay, so are you guys okay if we pull this one then, number 9, Mr. Tower?
yes.
Okay. All right, number 10, 209 South Bird Neck Road, Beach District, everybody okay with that? All right, number 11, Joshua Coe, trustee, 407 18th Street, Unit D. I'm voting no on this one personally because that's the one with the messed up parking as well. I don't know, do we have a speaker on that one?
I'm not sure. We didn't have any opposition at all signed up before we came in.
All right, so I'll be voting nay on that one.
On this one as well, I have to abstain from this one. I've had some dealings with Attorney Josh Coe, and so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, so Wooten abstain. Okay, I'm no. Moss, Henley, Jones.
No for me.
Jones,
You want to pull it?
Wilson. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Anybody else?
So you need to pull that one too.
All right, we'll pull this one too then.
You're too in denial territory there.
Yep, okay. Number 12, Christopher Tang, 417 20th Street, 421 20th Street. Okay. 13, Shiplap Cottage, The Cove LLC, 201 87th Street. That's actually in the Lynn Haven District. It's not in the Beach District. I don't know why it says beach on here. So I'm okay with that one. Jackie Yost, 301 Winston-Salem Avenue, Beach District. And then we're already going to do this one denial. Okay.
Okay.
So are you going to put the number 15 also, you probably ought to pull just in case there's a speaker?
So we'll pull 9, 11, and 15.
And 2.
And 2. And 2.
I'm sorry, and 2 as well, right. And so let me just, on the consent items, let me just be sure. Mr. Moss, Ms. Henley, and Mr. Jones are voting nay on all the consent items. Is anyone else voting nay on every consent item?
The short-term rentals.
Right,
Only on
not
the-
resolution.
Not the resolution.
Right, but the other items.
Yeah.
Okay, so Moss, Henley, and Jones, got it.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Go, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, just moving on, the chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed session pursuant to exemptions from the open meetings allowed by Section 2.23711A Code of Virginia as amended for the following purposes. First, publicly held property, discussion or consideration of acquisition of real property for the public purpose or for the disposition of publicly held property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the public body pursuant to Sections 2.23711A3. One item, Beach District, another item, Beach District, another item, Beach District, and then Princess Anne. And then to personnel matters, discussions, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation with a specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body pursuant to Section 2.23711A1. First, the council appointee performance evaluation, and next, city manager selection. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can you hold the couch?
Yes. Councilmember Abbott?
Aye.
Councilmember Berluci.
Aye.
Councilmember Henley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Moss.
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse. Councilmember Tower.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood. Mayor Dyer.
Aye. Okay, at this point, we will recess and reconvene in executive.